Whether there's be new changes, of course. This is all, I know you're not that interested in my position, but I think if you're a person consulting a debate graph.
Hi, Gene.
I mean,
I guess.
Yeah, if you're a person looking at a canonical series of claims, you want to know where you stand, and you want to be able to say where do oppositions to where I stand lie. So you will want to tell the system, this one I believe in, this one I don't believe in, so that you can get emphasis on, okay, what is being, where are the objections to what I believe? Or how well is that supported? Or how well are the objections supported? And then you get into, is that a consensus objection, or is that, is that a fringe? Or is that something that is,
Isn't that what scoring is about?
Yeah. I mean, this is a scoring meeting, right?
Oh.
But I'm seeing the dimension.
I thought it was curation.
Curation. We can make it whatever we want.
Oh yes, true. It's true. I tend to think of scoring and curation as related, and that's not a given. Fair enough. So maybe we should refocus on curation.
So yeah, so my original agenda was to talk about practical issues that Visaurus has. So cool, Gene, that you're here. Do you think it's makes sense to talk about it right now? You're muted. Yeah.
I would say I don't have something to sort of planned, as it were. I mean, we're happy to dive into anything, but I'd say if there's something else,
I don't want to hijack the meeting. We spoke about scoring yesterday, and I think it's fine to speak about curation now.
Yeah. One thing that came up in the last meeting was that to accept, if a change is proposed, and to accept or reject it, that instead of voting, you argue about it. Like you have pro and con arguments for that change. That's something that came up. Does anybody have a strong opinion about this? Because I cannot really see it working in practice this way.
Yeah, I do. Because it's infinite regression. I mean, then what if you disagree on those arguments and those? The whole point of curation is that's where you draw the line. That's why, what are the minimum things that you need to abide by in a platform? That's why curation comes in. Anything else, to me, is not a curation discussion. It's what are the features of argumentation. But so these discussions should be about, one, where do you draw the line, and then how do you decide on these things that aren't discussable?
Exactly.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Making a decision.
Yeah, it adds quite a bit of complexity. I like it from a very high level perspective, but practically it seems unwieldy.
Believe it or not, I think I agree actually, but the idea is to ground the infinite regressive argumentation in a ground of curation. It means we have two mechanisms. It's more complexity, but I think it's justified in this case. But for one of the rare times you'll make me hear, yeah, we can have both actually. I mean, I'm just saying it's one of the rare times you'll hear me criticize the fact that there's complexity because there's two systems, but I think it's justified.
Yeah, I mean, if it's significant enough, it's probably worthy of a claim on its own right.
And you can still enact whatever curated action happened, but you can still start a debate about that curated action regardless of it actually having happened. I mean, within the system as we have it right now.
Okay,
imagine.
There's really two cases, and distinguishing them is what the argument is about, right? In one case, you're improving a claim, as in you're clarifying a claim, I should say. And in the other case, you're actually modifying it. And the question is, it's usually a fine line. When does the clarification become a modification? And this is where fine cases and arguments may happen. And that, when you're modifying it, does the new argument replace the previous one? And really, in clarification, it's always worth replacing. And whereas if the argument is different enough, then you want them to coexist side by side. And then there's another consideration, which is clarity is relative to a community. Like if there's issues of jargon, and Jamie was making the point about complexity levels, you may want different descriptions of a claim to coexist at different complexity levels and specialization level and community specific. And each of them may have its own clarification path. And how to transition from one to another is a valid question. But there's certainly the idea that for a given community, there's, for a given language, for a given epistemic community, specialization, so on, there's one way that's, if not best, at least good enough, and that there's a clear path of improvement from one to the other. And that's a clarification path. But we have to know when does the clarification, and there will be argument, but it's a different kind of argument about, did you really change things now by your clarification? It's a subtle thing, but usually there's a yes or no answer that can be made. And I think that making that into an argument tree is overkill. And basically, if somebody says, did you change it? You can ask, okay, what is different? Can you make explicit what the difference is? In which case, yes, we'll split. In the other case, no, we'll consider it's an improvement. But can you be explicit about what's changed?
I'm interested in Stephen's opinions here. Like, do you think do you consider it a solved problem on Stack Overflow? Like if a question is, how questions are improved or rephrased?
Yeah, to me it works. I mean, if it's unclear to 5 people or a moderator, it just gets put on hold until it's clear enough, and then it can be reopened through the same mechanism where 5 people agree, yes, this is a clear question. And the mechanisms of, in this case, discussing whether or not something is a clear question is not by, well, there's no regression here, right? Because the system itself is not an argument. But I think the whole question of whether or not you would want to discuss arguments about curation as argument trees, I mean, would it make it more useful? It's not so much, you can do it, but the big fallacy there is then believing that you can enact on that. Like, oh, through that argument, we conclude something. And then if the argument resolves into everyone agrees that it's a good rephrasing, then it will, because then you are calculating the outcome of the argument, which is not really the same as the original argument tree. I mean, if you would discuss curation actions through an argument tree, I would just totally decouple it as like an alternative to commons, basically, not as something to enact on.
For the record, I'm not exactly saying I want these arguments to be argument trees, and I do think it would make it more difficult. I'm just saying I would ask if you're saying, and I think there's a difference between Stack Overflow and, say, think Wikipedia, right? In Wikipedia, you can endlessly clarify the article. In Stack Overflow, there's a moment where the question is clear enough as a question, the answer is clear enough as an answer, and the question of deduplication is less critical to Stack Overflow. They
embrace it. That's the whole point. There's no problem with duplicates in Stack Overflow.
Exactly.
As long as it creates a duplicate, you just point to the duplicate, and then the original duplicate remains. And
exactly.
Extra search engine on.
Yeah. And for me, in a canonical debate type thing, you want something closer to Wikipedia than Stack Overflow. So I don't, like I'm saying, the Stack Overflow adequate mechanisms may not be adequate for canonical debate. Nonetheless, I think that there's still lessons to be learned. I'm not saying it's not relevant, but I'm saying we do have to be aware of the cost of duplication is not the same.
Right. What I find is interesting that in these curation and moderation system, decisions are made. Decisions are made to decide about something, but the whole point of what we're trying to do usually is a decision-making system, but about way more complex decisions.
So I will heartedly disagree there. That's why I keep bumping up against, I'm not into modeling truth or decisions or whatsoever. I'm modeling arguments. I'm making them transparent. I don't want the system in any way to make decisions based on that.
No, but it can be used as a base for decision-making systems.
Well, I think if you want it to be used as a basis for a decision-making system, you're modeling something different than what I'm doing. Because if that's a goal, you're going to have inherently different ways you want to do scoring, for example, and etc. And that's why I think I disagree with some opinions on scoring in CDL, because that's not my goal.
Okay.
But that aside, yeah, that is a key difference, right? You need to make a decision. How do you do that?
But I think it's true that there is probably a fundamental difference between decision support on the one hand and deciding, is this description of a claim clear enough, which is a very different type of decision. And you can be much more final on those because it's about, okay, how many people misunderstood it? Or is this clearer than that? Does this lead to more or less misunderstandings? This can be very explicit.
The bigger problem is, can you push through a change if there's disagreement on that? And if there's no dependencies, and that's why the whole point of reuse of claims, it's not as easy as just pointing to reusing a claim. Claim reuse becomes complicated when the claim is reused in multiple different contexts. If you change the original claim and you make it more specific, as in the same instance, you replace it, if you will. You can't just do that if it's already used elsewhere. Or you need to, everyone, everywhere in each context that has used that claim needs to confirm, yes, this is better. And that's the whole problem. I simply lock down claims entirely once they've been used in a different context. So I only allow claim modifications if they're only linking to one specific context, meaning if you add a claim as a supporting claim to another, but there's no underlying claims that support it, for example, or the claim is not reused anywhere else. Otherwise, it becomes a curation nightmare.
Okay,
so,
that's a fascinating point. Yes. Is it possible to think of it as a problem of generalization? To say the claim as used in this argument is local and unique, but it's the same claim. It's a specific case in context as a more generic claim, which is continuously improvable, and say the specific claim is fixed or mutable, who cares, because it's local by definition, but the generalization across arguments it's a generalization, and it has its own quote unquote life cycle of modification. I don't know how practical that is, but this is definitely where I would tend to go, to always say there's the claim in context and claim out of context, and they have their own life cycle.
Which is one of the main problems with argument mapping if you want to support reuses, for users to understand the distinction, because a claim is always seen just through user experience within context, and that's why it's so hard to map arguments out of context. But I mean, that doesn't indeed, like you say, I think it should be perfectly possible to retain the original claim, and you can have a discussion. Well, this claim is not the most relevant one or not specific enough. You're probably within this context, you can infer you're actually trying to talk about this more specific thing, which would be better. And then you can replace it without removing the other claim, right? You can introduce a new, more specific one. And then it's basically the same as saying the original author removes the supporting claim. There hasn't been any discussion whatsoever about that, so it's fine. It can be removed and you add a more specific one. Actually, I support that right now. For me, any claim can be removed as long as there's no dependence on it, if you will.
Yeah, interesting points.
The UX of that is horrible. And yeah, the main problem lies, we talking in context or out of context? And it's really difficult to interpret.
No, but I think that making that very explicit may actually make it easier to say, here's the claim in context, here's the abstracted claim, and then you can see all the contexts in which the abstracted claim is used. But make them into very, very different, explicitly different objects. I think it will be easier on the mental model if the distinction is made at the forefront.
Is it worth going through some like practical, simple examples and seeing where we agree and disagree, perhaps?
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Like, I mean, the simplest example that we have is the just editing for a version of a given claim. So I think I wrote one up on that. What was it? What's the markup app again?
What's the what? Sorry.
What was the markup app we were using?
From Stephen or?
No, from you. The
mark for the diagrams, you mean?
Yeah, just I mean, it's not all that important.
It's a markup wiki type thing, yeah. Collaborative editing, markup collaborative editing.
Whatever that was called.
HackMD, you mean?
Yes,
probably.
yes. Okay, sorry. Cool. Yeah, I mean, I wrote up what we're about to implement for our most simple version, right? Which is basically just editing the text of a claim where the presumption and the community value or whatnot is that the intent, or at least the apparent intent of the claim, cannot be changed. But given that it's just a proposal of the text you'd want to replace, it pops up with its own little UX element, and there'll be an upvote, downvote. You can comment on it, but ultimately either the original poster needs to accept it, or a moderator, most likely, in most cases, will step in and accept or reject after some period of time and votes. So that was like our baseline version. Do we already object to anything there
the discussion is in context. That only works in context, because
the
whole so you would need to have a separate discussion per instance where the claim is being used.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then if the outcome is to rephrase it, that means that you should probably just create a new claim and replace it.
Well, I thought you were saying the context is sort of guaranteed. It wouldn't be for everywhere the claim is used, because the community value around it is that you're sort of only rephrasing for copy, grammar, whatever, but the intent is not to even refine or define the claim.
Even that is super tricky. So if you have a claim that's used in two places, even just if you think it's grammar, or it's so easy to add like, a different verb that has a certain different quality, or adding all,
sure.
A simple word is all, like qualifiers. It matters so much.
I'm with you there. So like, where does the distinction ultimately matter? Like, would you make every claim once stated immutable? Like, if someone misspells a word, if they if the grammar is obviously wrong, like, would you not edit it?
No, so I edit it because that's on a, I wouldn't edit it if it's being reused elsewhere. And that's an interesting point. I think these are even two separate discussions.
Okay.
If it's something like punctuation, and even punctuation is dangerous. I think you should create a system ideally where you don't have typos, so to speak. A claim that has obvious flaws shouldn't be used anywhere. That's also on Socrates, I go through a draft phase. Like when a claim is first added, it's a draft and it needs to be approved, and it can only be used anywhere else after it went from being a draft to being accepted. So that's the first stage. You need to make sure that the claim is actually.
But that comes with heavy moderation, right? Like that's because you are moderating every item.
Yeah. Well, you can have a 2-vote phase. I was going there actually. You can have a vote for clarity, which is a public, crowdsourced vote. This is clear enough. We're okay. The copy is fine. We know what we mean. And when it's past that stage, it becomes immutable. And then we can do the voting on I agree, disagree.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying it's necessarily the right way, but it's one way that obviously works. And without moderation.
Yeah, I mean, to me, like that, there's a lot of sense in that, but beyond just like copy editing, you're going to have a lot of people saying, well, this term is not well defined or whatnot, right? So like your community values are now going to need to be around like what is acceptable, how well defined does it need to be?
Yeah.
Does every claim need to be at least 1,000 characters so that you can embed every definition that's relevant?
But that's a debate you want to have before you have a vote, because so many votes are meaningless because people don't agree on an interpretation of the sentence. And so and if you don't want to make it two-phase, you can have provisional votes and say, well, I agree, but because I understand it this way, is that right? And then,
you just run into the risk of the vote system replacing the arguments again, and then they want an argument system for the votes. So I add more to like disagreements like that. I just model as part of the arguments. Stuff like, is this specific enough? Well, that's a discussion I want to model, and I think we differ a bit on that.
I'm exploring here. I'm not hard and fast on this. So I don't know.
I thought the MAP way was all about
for me to agree or disagree. Yeah,
I thought the MAP way was all about progressive formalization. Like you want to refine these things as you go.
Yeah. But what I'm saying, when I'm saying you can have provisional votes, it's a way to say my vote is tentative, and I'd have to confirm it after we have this kind of clarification. And if we find
what is the vote on? What is the vote on? Because if the vote is just on the claim out of context, which is the only way that voting is allowed in soccer trees, then it's fine. It doesn't matter. You've voted out. If you can vote on a claim out of context, you're done. The context within which a claim is used is irrelevant. If you want to vote on relevance of the claim,
isn't really the use of it in context the vote? Like the person who's isn't the use of it in context really?
But that's the relevance vote.
Effective? Yeah.
That's the relevance vote. That's why I separate relevance from the claim. So if you want to discuss relevance separately, that's why that's a separate claim.
Yeah, I spent yesterday saying why I don't believe in relevance. I don't know if you saw, you weren't there yesterday.
I haven't seen the video yet.
Yeah.
Sorry, I owe people lots of responses on Slack. I'm way behind.
And I would tend to do the vote. I don't know if I would even think of votes out of context. I would do all the votes in context.
See, but that's interesting, because then how is it different? So you say that claims can live out of context, but votes cannot? Then what's the point of having claims out of context?
Maybe we should talk about what kind of vote we mean here right now. Because many systems have the problem that, they only provide this positive feedback vote, but what is it? Is agreement, or is it like, this is well stated, or
for me, it's belief.
Yeah, or
for
belief.
Me, it's binary, and I want to make it like a triplet. I want to make it, I either believe in it, I don't believe in it, or it depends is the third one that I shortly introduced on Slack recently.
And I think maybe what would help is make a multi-dimensional vote where like the meaning is very clear of like,
Let's
okay, this is well formulated.
Of vote.
Sorry?
Let's speak about dimensionality of vote. Yes, absolutely. But that was yesterday's conversation.
Yeah, we've strayed from curation in that sense, but
yeah,
if that's
no,
where people want to.
But curation is one dimensionality of vote, right? Saying this claim is unclear is a dimensionality of vote. It's not the same as the other ones. It's very different, but it's still a dimensionality of vote. Saying, when you say, I believe this is true, I mean, most things I believe in are true or false only in context. I don't believe they're true or false abstractly.
But then you're pretty much arguing, I think, correct me please, but that all claims need to be, that claims can be reused. All claims are in context. Because what else is the point of claim reuse?
The point of claim reuse is to tie together the claims in different contexts and to say, hey, this seems to be true in many contexts. This is a generality. And yeah, we can sometimes, I mean, induction, deduction, it's about going from specific to general or from general to specific, and they're both valuable. And yes, sometimes you will use a belief in a generic, in an abstract claim.
I would say in most of the times. I mean, when people make claims such as God does not exist, that is a claim, you write it like that, and there will be people that believe in that. For me, that's meaningful to capture. If then it turns out that these people have formed like, if you make more specific forms of that claim, or you place it in different contexts, and all of a sudden these same people value that differently, that's also valid. And then that might tell them that maybe they do not believe. I mean, people can change their beliefs, right? That for me doesn't make it the claim out of context, God does not exist. If people want to express their belief or disbelief in that, irrelevant.
No, that's fair. And you are right that I would allow probably out of context vote, but I'm saying you seem to disallow in context vote. I'm just saying I expect votes more to go from specific to general than the other way around. And like for me, contextual vote is primary mechanism, and for you it's secondary or even forbidden.
Well, I think contextual vote is inherent because you'll always vote on a claim because it came up in context somewhere. Again, this is the whole problem with like an end user interface. If you want to support claim reuse, to let the users be clear that if they're voting on something, that they should look at it out of context. But they'll inherently interpret it in context simply because it's presented in context. That's part of the problem of claim reuse.
This is one of the principal goals of the canonical debate, and why it's a canonical debate rather than just a standard argument map, is reuse of a belief in something across multiple debates. So, for example, Donald Trump actually won the 2020 election. That's a belief, right? People believe or don't believe. And you can use that belief all across the board of what should happen next with the US government, right? It affects every single one, and you don't want to rehold that, like have that debate every single time in different contexts. The idea is you establish that fact and moved on to what we should do with that, right? And that is exactly the separation in the white paper between the truth votes, right? And the relevance votes, which is, okay, sure, he won or didn't win, but does that matter in this discussion, right? And so what is the impact of that fact here, assuming you believe it, right?
Yeah, I'm realizing I had context-specific reasons to say I prefer the vote out of context, but yeah, I'm relenting.
Did you mean in context? Because I think
so meta. So
no,
meta.
no. I had contextual reasons to prefer contextual voting to non-context generalized voting, but I realized no, actually, I do also want very much general voting, out of context voting. And I agree with you both. It is important. It is an important mechanism.
But so yeah, we got there in terms of editing and curation and rephrasing of claims, right? So yeah, it's something just to keep in mind that when we're talking about rephrasing claims, that's almost always done, if you ask me, for contextual reasons.
Yes.
So
no.
So what?
Caveat. Think again of a Wikipedia type environment where but it's not purely Wikipedia because we're more interested in the links. So there is in context rephrasing to explain why this argument from this page is relevant to that why this claim in this page is relevant to that other claim. So that's the contextual part. But there's also the explaining the claim in the abstract, pedagogical introduction to what this claim is and what it's about. And that is editing it out of context. It also exists, and that's why I have them distinct.
It is, but if that claim is already used in multiple contexts, people will interpret it differently and will have meant different things in different contexts. That's a problem that you can't just edit it across the board.
And that's why I'm saying the abstract description is different from the in-context description. I'd have both in-context descriptions that are editable as such and a generic description that is editable as such.
Okay, so you're suggesting something along the lines of each time you reuse a claim, you need to rewrite it, or
only in the case when you want to, I think. Like you can,
Yeah, exactly.
as I understood, like you can reference the abstract claim as often as you want, but if you want to rephrase it, you make a specialization and reference that one.
okay?
I mean,
then it might be semantics,
looks-
because that sounds like making a new claim and making the relation between a more abstract one and a specific one and saying, well, this is the more abstract. I mean, then
it sounds to me more like the relationship between a claim and the argument, which is a claim used as an argument, and you can have a different text for the argument, but it's based on that claim. That's how it's been in the white paper, which is, yeah, you want to say it differently because it's in the context of the thing you're supporting or opposing. But
text for the relation is certainly going to be the 90% solution or 95% solution. I think sometimes the text for the argument, for the link, will start with the rephrase of the text for the original claim, because this is how you have to interpret this claim in this context.
So I wouldn't say that the claim should always be interpreted the same. The main reason why I even ever considered rewriting arguments is to remove redundancy. Because if claims are written out of context, which I want them to be, and we all want claim reuse, that means that you need to include all of the context in the claim, which means if you have two claims about the same context, and you want one claim to support another claim and they share the same context, the context is duplicated. So what very often happens is, if you want to write a claim out of context, you will need, for example, the examples, arguments that were posted on debate platforms. In the debate platforms in this example. So in debate platforms, definitions should be supporting blah, 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 blah. Then if you want to add a supporting claim that also includes that context of debate platforms, you also have to say debate platforms do blah, 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 blah. So rather than rephrasing that contextual thing that's the specificity of the claim in each claim, you can remove that and you can have an in-context representation of a claim. I just remove the debate platforms because it's a supporting argument either way of the claim about the debate platforms. You can represent it differently. That's the only reason why I considered argument text.
So if it's reused elsewhere, then it's going to come with a separate text for the new context.
Potentially, or it's just the out of context.
Yeah, not necessarily. Yeah, not necessarily.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I tend to, that is close to what I was saying originally before Tim saying it's handled by the link text. So yeah, I do tend to agree with that.
There's another problem with the link text, right? Because you can again, like,
well, you can have both.
By restating it differently, you might again actually have 3 different claims within. Yeah.
Yes. I would even tend to have both, saying this claim in this context, in the context of this argument, basically, because that's what we're talking about, right? We have a claim which exists in abstract form, and it may have a description in abstract form. And then you have the claim in the context of a specific argument. And then it may have a rephrasing for that argument, and there's a rephrasing of the argument itself. How is this contextualized claim relevant to that argument? So that's 3 different places where the texts which give meaning to the claim, which I see as normal.
Yeah, but all of a sudden you're mingling in context and out of context. It's tricky.
Again, if it's explicit, it's fine. If you're saying here is the definition of the claim, and this is the definition of the claim in context of this argument. Here is it. You can consult, if you want, the definition of the claim more abstractly and look at all the contexts in which it lives and the specific definition it has, possibly or not, in each of those different contexts, in each of those different arguments. But saying that there is an explicit object, which is the more abstract, decontextualized definition, and you're either reading the decontextualized one or the highly contextual one, I think makes sense. You have to know that you're reading it in the context of this argument or outside the context of this argument, and this should be made as explicit as possible.
Yeah, I feel like this is all putting everything backwards. Like I feel like it puts the language in front of the definition, it's merging claims that aren't the same claim, right? I think that if something is different in a different context, it is a different claim.
I agree they're different claims, but I'm saying they're specific cases of a more general claim. So
Yeah,
here's a specific claim, here's a general claim.
Well, let's take the phrase. But I'm not entirely sure it is. If I understand, Marc-Antoine, you're mostly talking about the rephrasing of the claim in the given context, and it might have subtle implications on its definition, right? Which I thought I understood, Stephen, you were
for pedagogical purposes.
That's the problem. Just like having negations, like is something a negation of something else? You might like that. That's already tricky. Well, it's fairly easy, but that's something right now that I would enforce through curation actions. It's not something I want to have a debate about. Same if you have text for claims in context, like for the arguments. It might not be that you might not agree that that's the in context representation of that claim.
Sure.
That's a tricky bit, because all of a sudden you are reinterpreting the original claim. And you might even be moving the context entirely, etc. So I agree.
Can we get a concrete example? I feel like we've drifted into abstraction to the point that
I can give one.
We might be arguing different things.
Or Gene shows Whysaurus, and we like talk
well,
about.
I was just loading the actual argument tree that led me to wanting to have an argument text in the first place.
Great.
I think it's a camel case and underscore one. It's highly redundant, and you'll instantly see what I mean.
The share screen didn't start yet.
I'm just going to share the
URL. Gotcha.
Yeah. Okay. So what you can see here is maybe not the best example, because it's a false dichotomy, but people do that regardless. Underscore formatting is more suitable than camel case formatting for code. That's the main claim being discussed here. Is that true or not? That means that everywhere in these underlying supporting opposing claims, you need to say underscore formatting of code resembles not blah, 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 blah. Camel case formatted code is shorter than underscore formatted code. Like take that one, for example. The camel case formatted code is shorter than underscore formatted code. You would basically just want to write camel case formatted code is shorter. That would be much more legible, and it would essentially be making the same thing, because the root claim already talks about underscores versus camel case. So you don't need to write the full thing there. But if you want to ever use this claim out of context, you do need to, of course, mention that this entire discussion is about this false dichotomy.
Sure.
So this is a concrete example.
Okay, but then like what I would say you need to do is the claim text itself, the claim, which is what you would call maybe the out of context claim, that you can believe or not believe as a standalone thing, needs to be written clearly without that redundancy. And that text that you're showing there is actually the text of the argument, which is using the claim to support or oppose something else. That's what I meant by that division. And there's only two. There's only two texts.
You're not referring to the example here, because the link I showed only shows out of context claims. I don't show argument text.
Tim, you're saying the out of context claim needs to have the more complete version of the text.
Correct.
It's clear, right? And I think we'd all agree with that.
Yeah, but then how do you agree?
Okay, yeah, I see these are fully written.
Yeah.
How do you what?
Yeah.
How do you agree on
let's
the
focus on that
in-context formulation? Because that's where the curation comes in. Is that like who writes the in-context claim? And can you write an in-context claim without actually also having an out-of-context representation? And I think that's what we're discussing actually.
So the in-context claim is what I would call the argument, right? Who writes the text for the argument? I would assume at the moment the argument is created, the person that created the argument would write it. And you wouldn't have to write anything. You'd have the claim. I mean, there's different approaches to how this could happen, right? One is you already have the claim, the standalone context-free claim, fully written. And the person decides to link it to support a point, right? At that moment, they can type in text, or they could leave it blank and it would use the out of context full sentence, which would be awkward, but readable. Or they could overwrite it and say, yeah, no, it sucks, it's ugly, whatever. The other approach
so, before you continue, if somebody does that, can there be disagreement on that rewrite, on the argument text?
Okay, but that's all the curation action part that we're maybe finally getting to. But it's the same thing as when an out of context claim is created or anything else. Any content that is created, the question is, can people disagree with that content that was created, right? Is that the best way to say
you're
it?
suggesting that text would be a curation action, that like if you add an argument text, then it needs to be curated whether or not it represents the out of context claim accurately within the context.
Like in my document that I'm listing curation actions, I'm actually considering any change to the debate content to be a curation action, because I haven't defined. I'm leaving it open to discussing point by point what should be the rules about that. But for example, creating a claim is a curation action. That's a curation action. You are changing the whole graph by creating something, right? And that is a question of, should everybody be allowed to do it? Should it go through an approval process? Each one of those changes we need to discuss on that level, right? So if one of those curation actions would be taking an existing claim and using it to support or oppose something. And in the process, they propose a text, right? Should they be allowed to do that? If they should be allowed, what is the process for allowing it? Should it go through an approval process or not? Once it's there, if what they did sucks, how should we handle the process of improving that? Which would be, open debate or voting or whatever.
So that's definitely an option, but it's worthwhile considering it's more work. And at this point, I think it's relevant that I shortly explain what I envision instead. So I don't intend to support argument text.
Okay, but yeah, so
but I came up with an alternative that gets rid of all that extra curation work. So all my claims are out of context.
No, okay, but what you're giving us is, to be clear, out of the box answers to the questions that I'm proposing we should discuss, right? You're saying, okay, this is my answer for all of these. And
it's a proposal.
You're creating a line. And you're creating a line, essentially. You're calling curation anything that isn't below the level of just anybody can do it, right? But I understand that. Yeah, so when I said curation actions, I meant any alteration to the content, right?
Yeah, I think that.
Go ahead and tell us.
That's also relevant to do, but I think it makes sense to disambiguate between the two because both are needed, and I don't think you can. Well, maybe that's something for you to consider whether you think with one mechanism you can resolve it all. I don't think you can, because then you don't want to curate disagreement. You want to map disagreement, right? So, but yeah, I don't know.
What was your proposal, though, Stephen?
So that's what I always refer to as context tags. So for me, the first assumption is I want to keep all my claims out of context because that's what enables true reuse, and I think that's one of the main things that I've been trying to do with Soccer3 so far. So rather than having an argument text when a claim is used in context, instead I just want to make it easier to add context to claims without writing it in full. So the specific camel case formatted code is showed in an underscore formatted code. I would basically rewrite as camel case formatted code is shorter, and then I would apply a context tag, like for example, the underscore versus camel case debate. And if you add a supporting or opposing claim, to another claim, it automatically inherits the context from that other claim. So suppose that underscore formatting is more suitable than camel case formatting for code, has a context like the debate on underscores versus camel cases. Any supporting and opposing claim will automatically inherit that context. I formalize it. So it will get added, which allows you to write shorter claims because implicitly, you know, it's about this false dichotomy here. And then you can also hide them if the root claim already has it, so you can make the UI a bit slimmer. That was my current idea.
Yeah.
Go, Mike Antoine.
Yeah. When you say camel case formatted code is short underscore formatted code, that's a claim. Fair. When you put it in the context as an argument to underscore formatting is more suitable, you're creating a link, and the link is implicit because the Socrates format and it's on the right, so it's opposing. But really, I would the shortening you propose for me is more appropriate for the link text. For me, if I had link text, if you had the link text, you would
what I call an argument.
What Tim is calling an argument.
Give a new description.
Argument
for an
link, the argument
yeah.
link text. You would say because camel case formatted code is shorter, and that would refer to the self-evident claim, which is camel case is shorter than underscore formatted code, and the implicit and missing assumption, shorter is better, which can have its own debate tree, because it is one of the controversial ones. But what I'm saying is the shortening of which you speak, the contextualization of which you speak, is more about the link text than about the claim. Rewriting the claim in this case adds very little value, though I was advocating for it in general. I think it's useful in general. But in this case, it adds very little value. What is important and valuable is making the link text explicit. And this one can be extremely compact because it refers to the full text claim. Yes, Gene. Or Tim.
Or Tim, if you still have something to say.
Yeah, but the whole point was this suggestion was that you didn't have to add link text. There's no such thing as link text. So this is a suggestion that prevents that, because then there's less disagreements. Automatically, if all claims can stand on their own and implicitly pull in more context, then you don't have, this sentence will become shorter automatically because it's, okay. I might have to visualize
I would say they're equivalent with one exception. I mean, the argument or link text is essentially the per use context tag that you're suggesting, with the one addition that your context tag could potentially be inherited for a few levels down, right? So that's
the main difference is the context tag is part of the claim. It's not something it's not like a claim and you can have the same.
It's part of the use of the claim, right? Like you were saying, you still have an out of context claim.
It is the claim. So it's the same as rewriting the camel case formatted code shorter than underscore formatted code. Take the same claim, but now you just write it as camel case formatted code is shorter, hashtag underscores versus camel case. You just implicitly add the context.
That's in that one context, right? So like if I then use that in a different...
That's his point.
That is the out of context claim.
It can be used in other contexts where we're comparing camel case and underscore for something other than just suitable, which is one question, but you could ask
when you use it
else.
in another context and you want the full text, say, because it's not
there is no full text. So this relies on humans implicitly linking the hashtag to the shorter text and inferring, that's what it means. It's like it's reducing language by just adding context explicitly to the claim. It's not about in-context use, but I think I might have to do a mock-up to make it more clear.
Okay, but all right. Fair. I mean, if we want to table it, that's fine. But I just wanted to clarify, if not.
So the point is, it's still an out-of-context claim. You just write it with a hashtag, basically.
Yes, but
so you write it less explicit.
What is the text of the out-of-context claim is still the full text, right?
No, there is no more full text.
Okay, so there is no out-of-context claim on its own.
It is, but the out-of-context claim implies context. So rather than writing the context
but there's no text
shorter
for the
than
out-of-context
underscore
claim.
formatted. Sorry?
There's no text for the out of context claim.
There is.
So if
the
I
text
use it
for
in
the out of context claim is camel case formatted code is shorter.
Okay, you keep it. You keep it.
And then as part of that claim, you just define context, and you can add multiple contexts. It can be the underscore versus camel case formatting debate, etc. So it's the context that the usering can use to interpret. So yeah, I'll make some mockups. I actually might have some lying around.
Yeah, I fear that the context is combinatoric, and I'm not sure how reusable they are. But I see how this works. I mean, certainly it can work, and it does. I see the point. I'm not sure I agree, but I see the point of avoiding to craft a link text whenever possible, because links are many, and writing link text takes time. And if you can avoid it,
and there might be disagreement on it.
Of course.
And how do you model that disagreement?
Yeah. For what it's worth. Sorry, go ahead.
Just like the whole hashtag idea, I don't see that as being tenable, because the moment you introduce general to specific, you're going to have an explosion of instances of of using the same claim in lots of different similar contexts. And how many hashtags are you going to have, and how are you going to distinguish each
My
hashtag?
Are claims. That's a caveat. Context are claims for me. That's also why I already discussed, for me, definitions are claims. So it's not so much you can disagree with the. So if you would do this in this case, I would probably create a claim like there is a debate about preferring underscores over camel case and vice versa. That would be a claim you add as context, and you just refer to it as like a short word, but you refer to an actual specific claim which describes the context.
Let me put it this way, Steven. You've convinced me that text per hashtag is going to be slightly less than text per link. I don't think it's going to be that significantly less. And I think it creates a mental overhead that I don't find easy to explain. I don't think it's an easy mental model as opposed to text per link. And I don't think there's such a gain from text per link that it's worth it. But
the hashtag doesn't have to be displayed if it's already present on the root. That's where the reduced text comes from. It's the same text. So if
no, I know, but I mean, it has to be part of the editor's mental model.
Yeah. But yeah, either way, it's something that I want to. It's my alternative now, because I also thought about link text, argument text, and I think like a couple of years ago I decided I'm going to do it like this because it's less UX, less disagreement.
Interesting.
So I thought I'd share.
No, I see the risk with link text. It's an interesting point, and it's an interesting alternative. I'm not convinced, but I'm not convinced either. Certainly worth exploring.
I thought the point of the hashtags were to allow the context to exist more than just one level, right? Which I think we were talking about before, and I fully agree with, and I don't know what the UX looks like for, but like I thought that was the core thing you were driving at, but I guess I misunderstood.
I mean, yeah, if that's the case, I disagree with it.
Yeah.
Can you mean that the hashtag represents a hierarchy between specific?
No, that you could use the hashtag throughout several levels, like you're trying to ground the context, trying to ground the use of the claim in a context, that you could meaningfully discuss across several levels.
and because it's simply making explicit what already happens when people add a supporting claim to another claim. They infer context. So if the claim you're adding support to has hashtags, you automatically inherit these, and opting out of that more specific context becomes a manual option. So
yeah, it's the inheritance that's
a powerful feature
adds
here.
adds the value there. Because if there's not an inheritance more than one level, then you're just talking about a hashtag being specific to a link, and we're talking about the same thing more or less, right? Or do I understand correctly? Like if there's no inheritance beyond the first level of use, then it's different recursive, names for a link.
There is no first.
I don't think there should be inheritance. I don't see how there's how that's relevant, and I see how that totally complicates what could be a much simpler model. Yeah.
this is the result I had from trying to do claim reuse. And I mean, if you see users adding claims or trying to add claims which are out of context to an existing argument map, you'll run into these issues. And you can resolve most of them probably through curation actions as well. But this is me trying to do less curation and more automatic stuff that users are more likely to add correct claims that are free from context.
Question. It's interesting. I'm curious to hear the counter arguments, but I'm curious, is the context always about the set of alternatives? And could that be modeled explicitly? Because shorter than the alternative or the alternatives. And if we had an explicit set of these are the competing options, and then you can have shortcuts about it's shorter. And then suddenly somebody comes up with another competing option and we have to reevaluate because, oh, we're not looking at 2 options, we're looking at 3 options. And oh, is the shortcut still valid?
Which competing options are you referring to now?
Here we have 2 options. We have camel core and underscore, right? And somebody comes up with another option, whatever that may be, right?
So this entire debate is a false dichotomy. I would just explicitly make it like that. That's the context here is the false dichotomy between the two. So this is actually not a good argument map, but it's good in the sense that if you want to add out of context claims here, you always need to repeat this false dichotomy. What happens in a real life discussion very quickly is that they make it no longer be a false dichotomy, which is good actually. So this is actually abuse of argument mapping. So that's maybe not why it's the best example. But
it's very illustrative. It's interesting to look at it. But what I'm saying is one way, like in this case, the resolution is probably like in Python, we use underscore for function and camel case for class names. And that means it becomes another marker to distinguish name types, whatever. So that's our resolution of that problem. Why not both? But in a decision situation, which is a real situation, which can also be covered, you have 2 options, and then you say this one is better because X, and that one is better because Y. And it's fine as long as you have 2 options, and you can have the shortened version in context, which is saying this one is shorter and this one is less expensive and this one is more certain and blah, blah, blah. And then somebody comes up with a 3rd option. And then suddenly you have to reformulate everything because you went from a dichotomy to a trichotomy to a tetratomy and whatever.
Yeah,
right?
so no disagreement there. This is not a decision support system, and it just maps a bad discussion in the first place. So in that sense, it's a bad example.
But no, it's not a bad example. I'm trying to see how does that scale. The question is, the hashtag that you proposed was, oh, you have to go?
See you too.
Sorry.
Take it easy.
Yeah, I won't drag it either. The hashtag was about there being 2 options. That means it's not resilient to adding a 3rd option, whether in decision or otherwise.
No. Just like you don't map decisions in an argument map. You map decisions in the decision support system. And I do believe you can build a decision support system on top of an argument map, but you need a different UI than a tree with supporting and opposing to do that. You need more of a table need with features as you outline. But that's a separate discussion.
Okay.
So
yes?
one question on the hashtag context. Like, I mean, it seems to me the hashtag context in your case will almost always be within relevance of a parent claim when it's used at some level, right? Like if you were able to successfully inherit the context a couple levels, maybe it's a claim 2 levels up, but it's almost always going to occur once you go to use what would be the out of context claim, right? Is that right?
There's no distinction. So I don't know how else to say. There is no in context and out of context claim. Right now in structured trees, all claims are out of context. They're designed to be interpreted out of context. They can be used in context, but you evaluate them or should evaluate them out of context.
But the hashtag is applied when it's used in context. No, okay.
The hashtag is
right,
applied
so
on the claim. So it's a simple way of shortening what you have to write. So
but
if somebody says
applied,
like, hey, what do you mean here? And then you say, well, actually, let me give a better example. I think the
okay, so if someone wanted to just argue the fact that camel case was shorter than underscore whatever case or whatnot, like on its own right, like you would then have to create another claim for that.
In its own right, and what?
Yeah, like irrespective of this particular tree. Like if I want to argue what would have been the out of context claim, for whatever reason, I want to say that's not true. This is probably not the best example of that claim.
I don't understand the question, I think.
I guess what I'm driving at is like if there are no out of context claims, like when I want to,
there's no in context claims.
There's no in context claims either.
All claims are out of context. All claims should be able to stand on their own.
Okay, but the hashtag is applied to that claim, right? So if I want to use the same claim in another tree,
then it's with the hashtag.
It's with which
the hashtag is simply replaces natural language. The hashtag is only there to say this text should be interpreted in this. It's like rather than you writing out in full, blah, 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 blah. Let me give you a better example.
No, but fair enough. But then I really couldn't reuse that claim in another totally divergent tree.
Well, unless it's relevant, but that you can only use it.
It was sort of in context.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So then
the exact same thing as it is now writing it out in full. You can't reuse a claim elsewhere either. If it includes context that's irrelevant to other contexts, you can't reuse a claim now either.
Well, if you're including the more specific, more complete definition of the claim, you could still reuse it elsewhere, which I guess you would be saying that in that case, you should probably have the same hashtag context in the other tree.
Let's make it concrete. You cannot use the claim that argument that underscore is uglier than camel case in a discussion whether you prefer like a dash case or whatever. That's irrelevant because it's specifically about this comparison between these two. It's irrelevant that one is uglier than the other in a discussion of whether another third option is pretty, right? So no, you cannot reuse that claim in that discussion. You can only reuse it.
Let's say I want to reuse the claim in a discussion of variable naming in conventions in a different argument tree, right? Like and I just want to reuse the camel case is shorter than underscore case. Sorry, let me pull that tree back up. Oh no, this is formatting for code. I'm having a hard time thinking of another use of the claim, but
we could maybe say like this is in the context of programming, but in other contexts.
Yeah, or maybe for hashtags themselves, social media hashtags that I want to reuse the camel case versus underscore case discussion, right? So it's not about code; it's about social media hashtags, right?
Nowhere in the current claim did it say it was about code. And that means that indeed it also applies about hashtags and social media. That's what it means for a claim to be out of context. Indeed, if that claim is about more than just code, the only reason you think it's about code is because, where was it?
Wait, so what is the hashtag that you would use then here? So camel case formatted code is shorter than you just want to say shorter, and then hashtag what?
Well, it would have to refer to the debate underscore formatting is more suitable than camel case formatting for code.
Yeah, so the parent one.
It is a specific claim linked to undercase versus camel case in code for formatting for code specifically.
Yeah, so the parent of that claim, right? So that the hashtag could just be the parent claim all is one or whatever, right? But so how would I reuse that then?
I wouldn't apply the parent claim. I would more likely write a claim because it needs to be a claim along the lines of there is a debate about yeah, I would probably frame it as a claim, as a context claim, meaning this is context. Like they.
Well, so what would it be in this case? What would the hashtag be here?
But I would say people disagree whether they prefer underscore formatting or camel case formatting for code, something like that. Or there is a discussion about whether underscore formatting or camel case formatting is better for code, something like those lines.
But it is a code specific hashtag, and therefore in the social media hashtag version, we can't reuse this claim.
Exactly. You can't do that now either. The current claim, camel case formatted code, is showed in underscore formatted code. You can't reuse in a social media discussion either. So it's the exact same thing.
All right, let's say the claim was camel case text is shorter than underscore formatted text.
You can add that claim, and then indeed, then you're talking about something more abstract. Sometimes it's relevant to have more abstract claims. In this case, yes, I agree. It could actually be a more abstract claim, but other people might say, "Hey, that's not true. That's not the case." You could say it's not relevant because specifically in code, that's not true.
Yeah,
that's really interesting because here
the
abstract claim would be less believable in general, but more relevant in a way. The fact that it's less believable in general doesn't make it less useful in this context.
No, exactly.
And that's sort of the specific versus the general.
Yeah, but that's a separate discussion over the context hashtag feature. That's the same regardless of how you solve it with link text or not. It's a separate discussion.
And also what I'm...
Yeah, I guess I'm just trying to put a point on... Sorry, go ahead, Felix.
Just like an observation is like, is more context in a claim always a specialization?
That's how I look at it. And that's why I don't always agree with the generic to specific proposals we have right now. For me, indeed, I think, I truly believe that, or that's what I'm exploring right now, is that you can make a claim or specific by adding context to it. That's, I think, what typically happens.
I fail to see the contradiction. I do think that context is the most frequent. I don't know if it's the only case, but certainly a case of generic to specific. How does saying context is a case of generic to specific invalidate the question of generic and specific?
No,
or are you saying it's always
how
context?
to model that? Some of the proposals how to model that. So yeah, indeed, I intend to model generic to specific by adding more context tags. That's what I'm exploring. I don't necessarily want to model that by making, again, an extra feature where you can, exactly. Because that, again,
and that I would be hard against, actually, because I don't think context tags are usable in the long run. I think they'll fail precisely because they're not ontologies. For example, there's no inheritance.
It's more work on the interpretation of the user, and that's again where we differ. I offload more work to the interpretation of the user. You want to model more things explicitly.
No, it's not just that. I think you'll have an explosion of tags. I think, like, for example, with if you have a model, you can take care of inheritance by propagating inheritance, which you cannot do with tags. You'll have to have
you can. That's why. So
well,
if
not without a combinatorial explosion.
Why? If the claim you're adding a supporting argument to has tags, automatically when you add a new supporting argument, you add a new claim, the tag of the conclusion you're arguing for gets inherited by default and becomes opt-in to make it more abstract, to remove, to say, well, that doesn't matter, I don't need these.
And would you also inherit tags from parents of parents, say?
No,
yeah, that's what I'm saying.
No, because all claims are out of context.
So then
I have some insights in this tags versus hierarchy thing. So in general, it's like Marc-Antoine says that when you, like, let's say we have a tag hierarchy or an ontology or whatever, and you want to tag something at the leaf of that tree, which means like it implicitly has all the tags all the way up of the tree, right? Marc-Antoine says it's a combinatorial explosion. I think that's not correct because it's logarithmic. Like the height of
it's combinatorial explosion if you don't model the hierarchy. And you have to do it by adding tags for each combination of, you know, A is kind of B, A is kind of C, A is kind of D in the A, B, C, D.
Yeah.
You know, if you have to model each.
It's still not combinatorial, but what are like the insight that I wanted to share is like I experimented a lot with algorithms that infer the hierarchy from tags, because like when this tag is used, this other tag is also always present, which means like, okay, this one implies the other one. From then you can basically infer an edge between these two tags and construct a hierarchy. And this works pretty well. I did that with, for example, with IMDb movie tags and stuff like this. It's pretty cool. You can see the huge trees evolving. So this works. So my general conclusion from this work is that having explicit tag hierarchies may not be necessary, because you can infer most of the stuff and use the inference as a suggestion to easily add all the transitive tags explicitly.
But
if you have a tolerance for error, sure. And for tags, it doesn't matter so much.
I think there are two separate discussions. One is whether or not you want to model generic to specific explicitly, which you can still do even if you use tags. The other one is using tags to replace link text. I think you can also imagine a system that uses tags to replace the link text, so you don't have link text, while at the same time still supporting the explicit modeling of generic to specific. What I'm saying is that if you support something like context tags, there might be less need to make modeling from generic to specific explicit, as in formalized in the computational model that underlies it. The difference is, do you want to formalize it one claim with text and another claim with the same text and a hashtag? Whether that relation, do you want to formalize that or not? That's a separate discussion than whether or not you can simply apply the hashtag in the first place. Does that make it clear?
No, but
yeah, I mean,
okay, sorry, go ahead, Gene.
No, go ahead.
Are you asking for like how to store the data? Like, do you store all the implicit connections, or do you store them explicitly?
He's asking how many bits of text he has to store, really, which is a valid question.
Well, there's multiple things here. When we're talking about the need to model in a computational model the relationship between two claims, of one being more specific than another, that's a valid discussion to have. I haven't really concluded anything there. In a context tag system, if you use context to make claims more specific, that would be the same as saying, do you want to draw a connection from one claim which has text and another claim which has the exact same text but also has a hashtag applied to it? Do you want to model that relation between these two, or you let the user assume if it's the same text and one has an hashtag, the other one doesn't, the user can interpret that one is more specific. What I'm saying is you certainly need to model that to support the concept.
But isn't that different? I'm sorry, I may be wrong, but I get the impression that here you have different formulations of exactly the same claim. It's not about the general specific. It's about you have a claim with specific formulations, but it's the same claim at a deep level, as opposed to a more generic version, which is different because it's more generic. Right.
And you're potentially trading off the, what would otherwise be the out of context reuse, it seems.
Maybe we only want
not as such
reuse, because like
not necessarily.
The example
the trade-off is ambiguity. The trade-off is really ambiguity. If you just add a context tag, the user needs to infer context, text, oh, I'm going to interpret the claim like that. If you just give them a full written out claim, it's less ambiguous. There's only one way of interpreting the relation between the two. That's the trade-off.
Where I do agree is that you do need different representations for in context and out of context, because the out of context representation is very verbose in context, and the in context is unintelligible out of context. So yeah, you need to separate them. Is the context determiner, can it be factored out as a tag, or is it edge? I'll have to think about that one. It's an interesting idea and I'll want to think more. But certainly this is different than the generic specific claim hierarchy.
Yeah, it's a separate discussion. It's a separate discussion, but it's related in the sense that indeed, if you add a context tag, what you're actually doing is you're adding, you're making it more specific. You're not modeling it like that, but if you take the same piece of text and you add a context tag, what you're actually doing is you're making that piece of text more specific. It's the same way as almost, yeah.
What will happen often is that what will happen often is that a single formulation in of a generic claim will correspond to the tag contextual formulation of a distinct, more specific claim.
What between these two will correspond?
I'm saying the generic formulation of a generic claim will often correspond exactly to the in context formulation of a distinct, more specific claim. Like if you took the two claims,
the formulation is the text, or what is the formulation?
Yes, formulation, the text.
Okay, so how does the user know that one is more specific?
It's because it's in context, as you say. What I'm saying is the in context, you will be tempted to use a generic formulation for a specific claim because it's clearer than making the specificity explicit in the text.
You want it,
but it's still a specific.
It fully depends on the arguments. It shouldn't be. If you treat claims out of context, it shouldn't be that you're using a more generic claim because it's clear. If you want to say
no, you're using
specific,
the more generic formulation. You're not using the more generic claim. You're using the more generic formulation, which corresponds to the formulation of the generic claim by accident. What I'm saying is claim formulations are not indexical to claim, or are not unambiguously.
Yeah, but again, that's why I by default inherit the tags from, or intend to inherit the tags from the conclusion you're arguing for or against. So by default, you inherit that context. It is specific. Yeah. If you want to make a more abstract argument, that if you want to pull in a claim that doesn't need to be that specific to support or oppose a conclusion, you can remove them. But by default, you inherit them.
What I was trying to say, what you're saying is right. What I'm trying to say is that when you say you make things more specific by adding context, you have to distinguish. You're kind of conflating, and you should distinguish the case where you're making it more specific in formulation versus when you're making a different, more specific claim. They're two different operations. And in some cases, it will look the same because the text won't change. The text will be the same if you follow either of these routes, but you're not doing the same thing.
But I don't have link text. I don't have link text. All the text displayed anywhere.
I'm not speaking about link text.
Okay, then
I'm not speaking about link text.
Can you restate it?
Yes. You have a generic statement, formulation, text.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Which is a claim.
Which corresponds to a generic claim, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, in some cases, you will use that generic claim in context and arrive at a certain text, and probably reuse the same text because it's
at a conclusion.
No. You'll use it in context. It will be one of the leaf on your trees, and you'll say, okay, I'm using I'm using the original text because in context it's clear enough, right? So you've contextualized the claim, but you haven't changed it. You're still referring to the generic claim.
Yeah, so that's what I have right now. You always use the full text of whatever claim you use, yeah?
Yes, yeah, that's one case. And there's another case where you want to say, actually, I want to make a distinct, more specific claim and use that in context, right?
Then you create a different claim that is more specific.
You create a different claim, exactly. But because it's in context, you'll be able to use the exact same text as the original in all cases, because it's in context, so it's interpreted in context. And I'm saying those will look the same because you're using the exact same text, the exact same context.
So no,
but
they
in
want
one
to look...
case you changed the claim, and in one case you didn't. And that's what I want to distinguish.
I need to see an example because I don't get that. I think there's... if you want to make a more specific claim, you add a new claim, you write text, and optionally you add different hashtags.
But what I'm saying is it could end up being the same text in context, the contextual text for that.
But I don't have contextual text. I only have out of context text. I don't have contextual text. All my claims
but you're
are
going
presented
there,
out
right?
of context. No,
you're going there. You're saying I'll have a text per hashtag.
This whole suggestion is to not have to do that. I don't have contextual text. All my claims are always presented out of context. I'm going to keep doing that, but in order to shorten them, I just allow to implicitly add context as a hashtag, so you don't have to write it out in full.
No, but that's what I'm calling the contextual text.
But
all text is okay.
But that's only for the visualization in context, and the original text is still there.
No, that becomes a claim. The claim includes the hashtags, if you will. It becomes part of the identity of the claim. All the hashtags linked to the
which makes it
part
in
of
context.
The identity.
Yeah, but
that means it makes it as much in context as if you write a claim text which writes out a context explicitly in context, as much.
What I'm saying is all these shorter formulations, this is what I'm calling contextual text. They're saying...
I'm just calling it a claim.
Well, they're not a distinct claim, are they?
It is. So if you add a claim, camel case formatted code is shorter than underscore formatted code. It's a separate claim than adding camel case formatted code is shorter hashtag camel case underscore debate. They're two separate claims. And then you can argue a deduplication. Maybe we should only.
Yeah, but your first one really wouldn't exist in the system anymore, right? Like you basically wouldn't have claims that set maybe at the very highest level when they get their own hashtag, but like all your claims would be getting context hashtags, right?
The main reason for adding context hashtags is to have to write shorter claims, basically. If you don't want to, it's very difficult.
Get that, yeah.
You'll get that if you have done argument mapping on source very much. Hey, did you mean this? And what happens is your claim just gets longer and longer, and before you know it, you're actually representing the entire argument in reformulations of one claim.
But Stephen, do you keep the relationship between the two claims then, if you make it a different claim?
So no, originally that's not my intent, but yes, it opens up a discussion. What do you do if they're separate claims? It becomes a deduplication question. The same way as if you write it, the same claim with a similar text, how do you deduplicate that? It would be similar. And I would consider it a different phrasing of the same claim, if you will.
Yeah, but so like, let's take the case where you had, I mean, it might be worthwhile to go through a concrete example in Slack or whatnot afterwards. Like I would like to do the camel case formatted text is shorter than underscore formatted text and then use it in the other tree sort of example. But like when you say deduplicate, like you have two claims, different hashtags, what are you deduplicating it to? Like there's no, sans context claim claim to deduplicate it to, right?
I'll have to go, but no, this is an interesting conversation.
I want to say the same. We're 1.5 hours.
Okay.
Just like throw in stuff that you would like to have on the next agenda. Like I wrote down already inheritance of context. That's something Tim requested. And from the discussion right now, I see as a topic might be deduplication and context.
Deduplication is definitely relevant. We haven't talked much about that actually.
Yeah.
And it overlaps a bit with multiple phrasings as well, which we have talked about, but is it the same?
It's related, but distinct. But closely related enough that we cannot speak of one without the other. So I approve.
So yeah.
Can we go through the concrete example on Slack, Stephen?
Yeah.
For the camel
Yeah.
case one? Cool.
Yeah, I'll talk to you.
Nice.
See you all.
See you all
Thank
on
you.
Thanks for the
Friday.
feedback.
Bye.
Bye.
Always a pleasure.